Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. We're building up to tonight's exciting Europa League clash in Denmark against Midtjylland. Top of the table of the Europa League, Midtjylland are. Graeme, I'm joined by Graeme McGarry of the Herald. You were given something of a tour around their stadium yesterday. How was all that? Ahead of the press conferences.
Yeah, very friendly people over here. Had us in and took us round the ground. It's a nice stadium. Holds about 12,000. The pitch is looking okay. We get right down to pitch side, so no excuses tonight for Celtic not to get the ball and spray it about. But yeah, it's I don't think it's going to be the most intimidating arena, but the locals did say that when it's full, there is a decent atmosphere. So yeah, it should make for a good occasion.
Great, we're going to get into lots of talking points today that surrounding the match and a wee bit on Celtic's managerial search that is ongoing as well. But before that, a word from our sponsors. It's Simply Furniture are a company located in Hillington, Glasgow, an independent brand dedicated to bringing contemporary style into homes across the UK. They have over a decade of experience in furniture retail, and they source only the finest pieces curated for quality, comfort and timeless design. They have a dedicated team to ensure your furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. And if you want to see their range up close, you can visit their showroom in Hillington, Glasgow. And if you mention the Celtic Way, you will get a special in-store discount. Yeah, how is it over there? Obviously, you were in Belgrade early in the season. You're over in Denmark there. How is the town out and about? How are you enjoying the trip so far, Graeme?
Yeah, it's good. It's slightly contrasting to Belgrade, I would say. Belgrade's a big city, a lot going on. Here, as I was saying in the briefing yesterday, our hotel's a wee bit out the way. And it's kind of, how I describe it, it's maybe like a Livingston or something out here, it's just like a lot of industrial buildings and not a lot else. But we were in the town the other night, and at that point, not a lot of Celtic fans about. We're starting to see more drifting in. Just at the moment, the hotels get a few who are enjoying the festivities already here. It's only, I think, 11 in the morning over here, but there's a few pints being taken in there, so they seem to be enjoying themselves. But yeah, as I say, up at the stadium, there seems a good bit of excitement locally about the game. Obviously, Midtjylland are going really well. And also the fact that, Celtic are a big name and a big club coming here. And I think they can get a good scallop after beating Nottingham Forest as well.
That's certainly the impression I've had from a couple of Midtjylland fans that I've talked to as well, Graeme. There's certainly a lot of optimism around their club at the moment. Then you spoke to Martin O'Neill later in the press conference and Kasper Schmeichel. Celtic trained at Celtic Park yesterday before flying over to Denmark. I don't know if everyone's seen the photos and the videos that are coming out of that. The video is actually up on the Celtic Way YouTube channel as we speak, so if you want to go and check that out after this, feel free to do so. But some of the photos, very good spirits in training at the moment, a lot of hilarity, a lot of jokes that seem to be going around. And then they travelled to Denmark. You spoke to them in their press conference. Martin O'Neill giving a squad update. He says that they think they've come out of the match against Rangers reasonably okay. A few knocks and a few bruises, he said. A few people haven't played a great deal, obviously, and went down with cramp and things like that, which is not really surprising given the pace of the game. But Celtic aren't in too bad shape. They'll maybe think about making a couple of changes to the side, Martin O'Neill says. But he's going to see how it goes. They have not made up his mind yet, and that's his stock answer. We haven't made up our mind yet. He always says that about team selection. He did confirm Alistair Johnston and Kelechi Iheanacho won't be featured in, though. They're not fit enough to take part yet.
Yeah, that's right. I think there is a case for saying that you want to just keep this momentum going. I know that it was a long day on Sunday at Hampden, 120 minutes and all that, but and obviously there's an emotional, mental toll that kind of game takes on you as well. But it's been a few days now since that. I think if it was me personally, which the Celtic fans will be glad it's not, I would go with the same team again. I would just keep the ball rolling. I think probably Kilmarnock at home on Sunday is a time when you might give these guys a wee rest if you want to do that. No disrespect to Kelly, but they're really struggling at the moment. And Celtic being at home, I think that is when I would be looking to maybe take one or two guys out and give one or two others a run. For me, that team played well on Sunday, and I would keep that.
Seamus Gallagher asking, is it a grass pitch or a plastic pitch? It's a grass pitch, isn't it? It's Nordsjælland who have the plastic pitch.
Yeah, grass. Yeah, 100% grass. They were when I was trying to do a video yesterday, they were very loudly cutting the grass. So yeah, I can absolutely confirm it's a grass pitch. And it's a decent pitch as well. It's not too bad. It's kind of unseasonably mild over here at the moment. For the time of year, it's maybe about 12, 13 degrees. It's actually a really nice sunny day today. So yeah, it should be great conditions for a good game of football.
I think most will be looking at a very similar, or if not the exact same team to Sunday. I've got a wee sneaky suspicion we might see Sriracha pulled out of the fray a little bit. I think he was he didn't train on the Friday before Rangers, and just given the amount of football he's played recently without, coming straight into the team pretty cold, I don't know. We might see Kieran Tierney tonight. I've got a wee suspicion there. Dyson Maeda played 110 minutes at the weekend. He's also coming back off the back of a muscle injury. So those are the two positions that I'm kind of looking at if changes are going to be made, that they're made there. But I think the bulk of the team, the spine of the team, is going to be pretty similar. For example, I think it will be the same midfield, and I'm pretty certain Johnny Kenny will start over Callum Osmond, although Martin O'Neill, again, full of praise for Osmond in last night's press conference, Graeme.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I just think to start the game, I think Johnny gives you a wee bit more of a physical presence up there. And Midtjylland are a real physical team. It's not quite St Mirren standards maybe land of the Giants, but it's not far off it. As well as the kind of technical players that are sprinkled among there. So I would go with Johnny Kenny. Interesting point about Maeda. I think he looked somewhere back to the days of Maeda that we all know on Sunday. I thought there looked to be a weight lifted off his shoulders. We don't know why or what's going on in the background, or why his standards had kind of dipped a little bit at the start of the season. But I think he looked a lot more like himself on Sunday, which is why I'd be tempted to keep him in. I understand, obviously, though, that you might want to freshen that up. And I think it was interesting. Martin O'Neill did talk a fair bit about James Forrest last night in the press conference and how well he's done, and the impact he's had not only behind the scenes as one of the experienced guys, but also, when I watched him on Sunday when he came on, I can't remember James Forrest being so direct like that for a long, long time. He was running at people. He had that lovely wee bit where he did nutmeg and laid the great pass on for Callum Osmond to run through and goal. And again, whatever Martin O'Neill's doing to them, I don't know, but he seems to have really rejuvenated a few of these guys. And I wouldn't be surprised if James Forrest was in the team tonight.
Forrest was excellent, and I don't know why it reminded me of this, but you remember he had that fantastic game against Bayern Munich a few years ago where he was just drifting between the lines and was just causing all sorts of mayhem, and that he reminded me of that a hand, and he is capable of that. And I think he coming into a game these days, coming off the bench, I think James Forrest can be fairly devastating to a team, and I think regardless of how the season plays out in that position, I think James Forrest as an impact substitute at right wing is a fantastic option for Celtic. I was very interested in Dyson Maeda on Sunday and how he played, not just like the quality of his game and what he did to impact the football, but just his whole attitude and his whole demeanour seemed different from what we've seen in kind of weeks and months gone by. I'm not sure if it was because it was Derby Day or whether he was just getting up for it. I don't know if Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney have managed to just get someone out of him saying, this is your last hurrah, give it everything for the next couple of months and leave Celtic a hero. That could be part of it. But he did seem a different character, Dyson Maeda, on Sunday, Graeme, which was interesting. I also noted, I don't know how much stock people put in these things, but after the game he made his first Celtic social media post for about 3 months as well, which was interesting. So I don't know, he kind of caught the Celtic bug again on Sunday.
Yeah, I did see that. I think he said PS Glasgow is green and white or something like that. I think Glasgow is green. So yeah, he does seem to have his mojo back, which is great because he looked like a man who just wanted to be anywhere else, to put it, rather bluntly. I think he was promised, well, maybe not promised, but the feeling was that he was going to move on in the summer. That didn't happen. Obviously, the club's transfer business, we don't want to go back into that argument again, but certainly they didn't quite get the players in that they wanted, and that meant that Dyson couldn't leave. They just couldn't sanction that. There would have been absolute mutiny, but I think everyone could see that it was taking a toll on him. And you could see the body language, the shoulders were slumped, his head was down. He obviously missed a few absolutely glaring chances, really important ones at the start of the season as well. If you go back to Kairat Almaty and the one-on-one that he had, and he just never seemed to recover from it. And you just thought, this is a real shame, because if he does leave the club at the end of this year, people are going to remember that, that things just kind of fizzled out for him. But it seems as if, even playing off the right, which I'm not a massive fan of him playing off the right, he just looked like a completely different player to what we've seen in the last few months. And yeah, long may that continue. But he's not alone. He's not alone in that. We've spoken about it before. I think it's Martin O'Neill. Sometimes even you speak to him as a guy, you're just as a journalist or anyone, you come away feeling a wee bit better about yourself after the experience. And it was really interesting last night when he was sitting with Kasper Schmeichel, and he was making a few jokes, because obviously Casper was speaking to the Danish media in Danish, and Martin O'Neill obviously wasn't understanding it. And then at the end, someone asked someone asked Martin about Casper, or how's he been? And he said, well, I don't really know what he's been saying about me here. So if he's been saying anything disparaging, I'll say that about him. And it just, the locals were loving
He also gave the very dry wit of, will he ever live up to his dad's reputation or something of that, which is very funny, very amusing from Man O'Neill. He's great in that context, isn't he? As you kind of mentioned as well, he seems a little bit less guarded maybe with the written press than he is with the broadcast media at times, and sometimes you get a bit more out of him on recent events. For instance, he did talk about all the fallout around the Rangers game on Sunday. He said in the piece that you've got up on the Herald and the Celtic Way right now, he said whatever sort of excuses they make, two things: I don't think it was a penalty, and I think Trusty was lucky to stay on the field, having seen those things back. So that's his points, but it's still one of the great fixtures in European football, if not the world. We won. Watching it back, sometimes there's things you miss. We had awesome, really great chances. Rangers did great with 10 men in the second half of the game, but we did create some chances. I'm delighted to be here. And if you said to me, I've got one more win over Rangers, well, that's the best news in the world. Very much, obviously, from the Celtic camp, Graeme, that the outcry in the wake of Sunday has all been a little bit absurd to a degree. People will put stock into various things that happened throughout the game, but from Celtic's perspective, they got the win, they move on, and the rest is just noise, really.
Yeah. I think it's, he obviously wanted to say his piece on it. Let's just say that, and I think he's made a good couple of points here. The thing about Martin O'Neill is he's not doing it for effect either. He does admit that in an honest way that Austin Trusty was a lucky boy, and I think he was. It was a daft thing to do. So I think that kind of gives credence to anything he says, the fact that he's not just saying, oh no, Austin Trusty should have stayed on the pitch and the referees did a great job. He's not saying that at all. But what he is saying is that these things ultimately didn't matter. At the end of the day, Celtic did deserve to win the game. I think any neutral looking at it in the end, although Rangers did well with 10 men, would say over the piece, Celtic deserves to win. But before he sort of closed the chapter on that, he definitely wanted to have a wee jab, at the kind of fallout that happened. But yeah, he does seem a wee bit more relaxed in that setting, and he'll say one or two things. And we also got Kasper Schmeichel separately from the broadcast media last night as well, and it was really notable the way he spoke about Martin O'Neill, not only as this guy who's come in, and what he said, it was the perfect sort of character with an aura about him to lift the club after Brendan had left, because particularly for Kasper, I think that was a real blow when Brendan Rodgers left. I know we've spoken about for a few of the guys in the squad it might not have been quite as big a blow, but for him certainly. But this guy, Martin O'Neill's come in, and we've all spoken about the aura lifting the place, and he's been bringing a bit of humour into it. But he went into more detail about it, and and I think sometimes we can get too hung up on that side of it, where it's all about the vibes and whatever. He's actually saying, well, no, this is a guy who's won European Cups as a player.
Of course, yeah.
He's forgot more about football than most of you guys will ever know, which was true enough. And he said just listening to him talk about football is a real education. So yeah, it was a really enlightening wee side to the press conference last night when we got the guys away from the cameras, and they were really, really interesting. And I think Martin O'Neill's comments, Kasper Schmeichel's comments, I think Celtic fans should be looking at that and feeling quite good just about the way things are at the moment.
What I've also noticed from Kasper Schmeichel and Callum McGregor, they've obviously been so full of praise of Martin O'Neill and everything he's done over the last week, but I'm getting a sense from them that they've been kind of waiting for Celtic to have this little turnaround. They've been waiting for that kind of big victory like they got against Falkirk, and this kind of just this winning mentality back in the team. It feels like they've been trying to find it all season. They haven't for whatever reason, but they feel like they've been due this little spell of good form just for the work they've put into it. I have noticed a couple of comments from Schmeichel and McGregor just kind of alluding to that, and that they've put in all this hard work and they felt like it was coming, and now it's coming and now it's here. That is part of it, alongside the Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney effect. Yeah,
I think Callum did say this last week that they were due to give someone a bit of thumping, and that's what happened against Falkirk. But I think if you look at the games prior to the Falkirk game, there was a wee bit of a staleness. You can't dispute that at all. I think people always talk about that horseshoe of death, if you like, that used to be there in a Brendan Rodgers team. I think that was a bit overplayed. I think you can't really. Certainly, I don't think you can criticise Brendan Rodgers in terms of his success at Celtic. But whatever had happened, whether his message had gone stale or just wasn't getting through, the players were taking too many touches. They were passing it too many times. A lot of the passing was too safe. It was allowing teams to get into their shape, into their low block, if you like, as they call it these days, and really make things difficult for Celtic and stifle them. At the moment, they're not really letting teams do that. When they're getting the ball, they're a lot more direct. There's a lot more pace about their play, a lot more energy, and I think it's a lot harder for teams, particularly probably the sort of provincial teams, if you like, in Scotland now, I would imagine, to really sit in and frustrate Celtic. It's going to be a really interesting dynamic to see how that translates to a game here tonight where a team will come and go at them. Because I think even to a certain degree on Sunday, Rangers sort of sat in a wee bit in the sort of opening of the game and couldn't really get out. Celtic were playing a lot of football in their half, but they were moving it quickly, and that meant they could create chances. But yeah, a different dynamic tonight altogether, and I'm really interested to see how Celtic cope with it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Midtjylland. There's a lot of chat around them at the moment, just with how they're approaching things and this change of manager mid-season after an unbeaten run and all sorts of interesting aspect to that. And from what I know, I think they're quite adaptable in formation, and that they'll sit with almost a back five at times, but then try to transition to a 4-3-3. So I'm keen to see how that plays out in a Celtic context too, where we know there's been some weaknesses there when Celtic are facing a counter-attack, specifically in Europe. But that has been in the past when McGregor's been a little bit more isolated in that deeper role, and I think he's got Annie Engels or Paulo Bernardo if he features tonight. I think it will be Engels, but just someone more alongside him in that Celtic midfield at the moment, which I think could be a benefit to Celtic away from home in Europe, with Nygren with a freer role towards the striker. So it's certainly going to be an interesting one tactically tonight, I think, just from both sides, really. I think I've put the frighteners up a few people with the interview I did with the Midtjylland expert yesterday, and that they're the set-piece leaders in the Europa League. I don't want to frighten anyone with the term set-piece XG, anyone of a certain disposition, but Midtjylland are leaders of the Europa League in that regard. But maybe the good news there is that Celtic are second in this table, so how much stock you put in this, I don't know. That's largely due to Celtic's efforts against Sturm Graz. It's a small sample size of data, so it's not particularly too revealing. What it does say is that Midtjylland do put a focus on set pieces. They're known for it. They've had a variety of set piece coaches who have moved on to various clubs around Europe, and it's basically a mantra of the club. They've got it up on the gym at their training ground. Their kind of set piece goal difference from all the teams, all the other teams in the Danish Superliga. So they'll certainly be a threat in that regard as well. I'd say they're more threatening than Braga, Sturm Graz and Red Star Belgrade at set pieces. So that is definitely something Celtic will have to be wary of as well. And it'll be a busy night, I suppose, for Austin Trusty and Liam Scales. But they've produced in Europe before, Graeme. I don't think there's much fear there having those two in place there, even though Cameron Carter-Vickers is out.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it, when Austin Trusty came back into the team, and he was, I know he had his plantar fasciitis and he was out of the team for a while because of that, but he also wasn't really getting a look in. Martin O'Neill made a wee comment last night where he said the big fella who played at Tynecastle, he was talking about Dane Murray, obviously, and he's decided obviously to lean more on the more experienced guys like Austin Trusty, and he's not let him down at all. I mean, I think his performance on Sunday was really good, apart from the daft moment. I'm getting man of the match, obviously rubbed salt into the wounds of a few people, but I thought it was deserved in a lot of ways. I thought he played really well. As you say, I think we all hark back to that performance last season when they played against Atalanta. It was Liam Scales and Austin Trusty went over there. Everyone said in the lead up to that game, Atalanta are a real dangerous team. How are Celtic going to cope with that? Those two in the back line without Cameron Carter-Vickers. So I think we would all say as the mainstay in there. But sort of similar to maybe a few players of late, hasn't really looked himself up until that injury. I thought from the start of this season he's not been particularly at the level that we've come to expect for Cameron Carter-Vickers. That might come back when he eventually comes back. Yeah, who knows, under a different manager. But certainly at the moment, I would have no qualms about Austin Trusty and Liam Scales being in there as a centre-back partnership. It was interesting you mentioned all the stats and all that kind of thing. We spoke to the Midtjylland manager yesterday, Mike Tullberg, who's people with better memories than me may remember he had a short spell at Hearts back in 2008. So he was talking about that. But Midtjylland, actually, you've probably covered this, I guess, but they sacked their manager, Thomas Berg, who was on a 17-18 game winning run just because his underlying stats weren't where they would want them to be. And when Mike Toberg was asked yesterday, who's the danger men in the Celtic team, he said, well, we don't even think about them. We just think about our stats and where we can really affect the game in that way. So a really interesting approach to the game. And I think it will be, things like set plays will be super important tonight. And if I was Celtic, I'd be looking to limit the amount of corners and certainly limit the amount of free kicks they're giving away around the box.
Yeah, I did kind of wonder, obviously people are talking a lot more about data in regard to players. If the new trend in European football is also underlying data of managers and kind of trends in the team, that will be an interesting dynamic. Can you imagine a manager in Scotland being sacked because his underlying data wasn't good, but he's on an 18-game unbeaten run in the Scottish Premiership? That would cause scenes and probably a few columns in the Herald newspaper, Graeme.
Yeah, probably. We actually spoke to a couple of the local journalists about that. Like, well, how can you sack a guy? And he says, well, no, there's a real understanding over here that this is the way that Midtjylland operate. It's got them a lot of success in the past. So you have to look at that because eventually the underlying data will then come back to bite you. If you're not doing these proper things, you can't just get results forever on the basis of that. So, yeah, an interesting approach, probably one that wouldn't go down so well in Scotland, I guess. But, yeah, it's got them a lot of success, so you can't really grumble.
I don't think Dermot Desmond will be looking at the underlying data when considering who he's going to appoint as the next Celtic manager. I say that, Graeme, but Celtic's managerial search is ongoing. There's reports that Celtic are going to be starting their first round of Zoom call interviews over the next few days. Not quite sure what that means in terms of the progression of everything. As I kind of said to you yesterday, it doesn't sound like particularly things are moving that quickly and that Celtic have one candidate they're laser focused in on. There's lots of names doing the round. Some bright and colourful names doing the rounds at the moment. What's your gut feeling on this, Graeme, in terms of like what kind of manager Dermot Desmond will go for? Do you think it'll be a more of a known quantity than like a Kieran McKenna type rather than someone from totally left field like Ange Postecoglou was? For me, it feels like Dermot Desmond is probably going to go with something a little bit he's more comfortable with and maybe has name recognition in England and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe. I think, things can change so quickly. Yesterday when we spoke, I wasn't entirely convinced that they weren't lining up Martin O'Neill to stay a bit longer than maybe we expected. But when we spoke to Martin last night, it was funny because he has made a big thing about mentioning, I've not even looked at the fixtures. I didn't know with the European game, all this kind of thing. But what he did say last night was he has had a wee squeak ahead at the fixtures now. And he said, looking at that until February, at least, we're playing, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, whatever, 2 or 3 times a week. He's like, with travel involved, he said, that's a lot for a young man to deal with. He's like somebody 30, 40 years younger than me, never mind somebody who's 73. And I think from his point of view, that was the first sort of inkling I got that he was thinking, I can maybe do this for a wee while, but let's not get carried away here. I want to go and have a coffee with my wife in the King's Road again. So I think the international break is when we're going to see the movement. He did mention that again last night, Martin O'Neill, no matter what happens, the results, that's probably when Celtic are going to look to make an appointment. In terms of the type of character, I think, again, Martin O'Neill's mentioned somebody much younger. Now, that's vague because most managers are younger than Martin O'Neill, with the greatest of respect. But I think maybe someone who fits that Kieran McKenna sort of, prototype, that kind of profile is probably the guy we're going to see. I don't think it will be an experienced campaigner, if you like. It'll be someone around that kind of age, maybe mid-40s, early 50s, at a push. And somebody who can be here for a few years and really kind of implement a philosophy. I think that's what Dermot likes. That's why he went back to Brendan at the end of the day. So I don't think it will be too left field. I don't think we're talking there about Efren Juarez and guys like that who've been mentioned with the job. I just don't see it. I don't think he'll take a risk to that degree. I think it will be someone who has a decent pedigree in the game and who can come up here and people will know who he is.
I've been kind of banging on about the Kieran McKenna thing for quite a while, to be honest, because it's a name you've heard around Celtic for like a couple of years. You just hear these things sometimes about the kind of people that Celtic are looking at, etc. And his name's come up multiple times. he's linked with the job in 2023 as well. Obviously, there's financial difficulties there. I just think it'll be. I think he fits. If you look at any manager out there right now of the profile of the type of manager that Dermot Desmond goes for, Kieran McKenna almost ticks every single box. So it really comes down to money at the end of the day, and also the intent of Kieran McKenna as well. I would be very surprised if he wasn't Celtic's first choice, frankly, and then things obviously progress from there if it's not able to be done. But
what I think's interesting, John, was when you look at the Kieran McKenna press conference that obviously we all tuned into once his name was linked with the job. When he was linked with the Rangers job in the summer, if you remember, he shut it down very quickly. That's just not going to happen. When he was linked with the Celtic job a week or two ago, he spent 8 minutes talking about Celtic. And he wasn't exactly saying come and get me, but he wasn't saying either explicitly no, I'm not interested in the job. It was very much the sort of straight back, I've my family connections with Celtic and whatever, everyone knows that, and I'm focused on my job here, but it's an interesting club and a magic a big club, so he wasn't exactly shutting the door on it, I would say. You can sometimes read into these things a wee bit too much maybe, but I think that was telling that there's very much at least an inkling of interest from him. I think if the financials could be worked out, I think he would be very open to coming up to Celtic.
It definitely seems that way to me, and that's why I'm kind of we're not getting too involved in kind of the runners and riders of all this on the channel or even the website really, because I think it's still to play out. I think there will be steps taken at some point that people will find out about, and then we can kind of hone in on maybe one or two people that Celtic are pursuing or keep in mind of. As we know, Celtic pursued Eddie Howe for a long time and then eventually had to switch to Ange Postecoglou. So all of these things can change, and as I've said before, this is really about who can convince Dermot Desmond in a room that he's the man for Celtic, because I've said previously, Graeme, but Ange Postecoglou on paper, you wouldn't have put him down as a Celtic manager, but anyone who would have had a half-hour conversation with him would have known he would have been the perfect Celtic manager, and it really comes down to who can convince Dermot Desmond in that kind of almost one-on-one situation. That's how it's been decided at Celtic for a fairly long time now, is a list of people are put forward, the club, court various different people, but it all comes down to this kind of one-on-one interaction with looking Dermot Desmond in the eyes and saying, I am the man to take Celtic forward type thing. Yeah,
and you can argue all day long about whether that's healthy or not, or the best way for a big club to do their business, but that's the way it is. So if it is to be Kieran McKenna, one of the objections I've seen from people is the fact we know that he's got this £5 million release clause. We know that he's one of the highest paid managers in England after taking Ipswich to the Premier League, a couple of years ago. He's on £4 million a year down there. He might have to take a wee wage cut if he comes up here, fair enough, but I don't see the logic behind scrimping on a managerial appointment. You might spend, with the greatest respect to guys like Michelangelo Balakwisha, you've spent £6 million on him. Why not spend £5 million on a manager? He's the most important man. Dermot Desmond may argue against this, but he's the most important man at the club for me. And if you've got the right man there and someone who can take Celtic forward, because I think somebody who's going to come in and show a bit of ambition is what's required. Someone who will push the club. I know that maybe Brendan Rodgers did that and it put some noses out of joint at times, but someone who wants to show that ambition and take Celtic on a level not only domestically but in Europe. And if they think Kieran McKenna is that guy, then they have to go and get him no matter what.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you have a preferred candidate, you have to pursue him quickly. And really, as you know, Graeme, you've been speaking to me the last couple of days, as people watching the channel know, I've been very caught up in the Matt O'Neill thing, and I don't shy away from that. But I do think the overall strategy of Celtic should be get a guy in, get him prepared for the rest of the season, and really going into next summer and everything as well. But as we've been talking about, a win tonight or a positive result tonight certainly has people talking about Matt O'Neill legitimately, not even in a kind of wistful way, but in a real sense of, this guy's getting the job done at Celtic. Why would you change something that seems to be working and getting a tune out of these players? But that's all to be determined. I think I've freaked people out a little bit with the chat of set piece XG in the chat, so we'll go a bit old school, Graeme, and just talk about a good old-fashioned football prediction tonight based on gut feeling alone. What's your thoughts on how tonight's going to go?
I think Celtic are coming here in good fettle. I think they feel good. The mood around the camp, you can just tell when you speak to the players that everyone's got an extra wee spring in their step. I think it's going to be difficult. I think Midtjylland are the same. They look very relaxed. We spoke to Kevin Mbabu yesterday, former Newcastle 5 man up at Rangers, if you remember, a few years ago. He made a wee joke about Celtic being the enemy. He wasn't being entirely serious. I saw people get a bit angry about that this morning, but he was actually very respectful towards Celtic, and they know they've got a big challenge in their hands tonight. But I'm going to sit right in the fence, get the splinters in my bum, and I'm going to say 1 each. Or maybe a score draw anyway. I think there'll be goals.
Yeah, I think a certain part of me, again, I was a little bit negative in yesterday's show. A certain part of me thinks that Midtjylland are going to win tonight, because I just think they're looking like a form team. They've got a bit about them in Europe this season, and if they do a job on Celtic are there to be done a job on, basically. But yeah, I think a score draw is a realistic outcome. I don't think it's totally beyond Celtic to get a score draw tonight, and so I would be happy to see that as well. We 1-1 would be good. I am seeing everyone's comments, and yes, sorry, Graeme, on you go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, a lot's been made of the fact they are top of the Europa League, and you can't take that away from them. But you've got to look at who they played as well. One of their wins was against Sturm Graz, who Celtic have beaten. One of the wins was Maccabi Tel Aviv, and the other one, okay, it's a great win at Nottingham Forest, but it was in the final days of Angie's short reign. They were in turmoil at that point, obviously quite vulnerable. Now, great win, of course it was, but I don't think you get too carried away. It's as you said earlier about the stats, it's a very small sample size, and I think you can look at Celtic's recent form and make a good case that Celtic have a great chance coming here to get the result. I think they'll get a draw, and I think that'll be a good result.
I think this comment from Brown Warrior sums up a bit of the chat. In the live chat today, he says the data suggests we will get bumped, but the optimism in me thinks 12-1 to the good guys. There you go, Brown Warrior. There you go. I am enjoying the live chat today. There's a lot of funny comments and stuff going on, and do enjoy the debates in there as always. And we thank you for joining us live. If you're not joining us live, you're watching us a bit later on. Leave your comments below and let us know how you think tonight's going to go and what you want to see from Celtic, in the short term, but also in the long term with a new managerial choice. That is certainly going to be the big talking point as we move into the international break. I think it will definitely shift towards who is going to be the Celtic manager, because it will need cleared up one way or another. Graeme, thank you as always for joining us. I really appreciate your insight from Denmark, from these European away games. We do appreciate that, and you'll be out and about today, and you'll be at the game tonight. We're going to get you on for the pre-match show just after the team news is announced from the stadium to give everyone a bit of the flavour of the atmosphere in the build-up, so we look forward to that.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next time.